Ya jai hi, ya jai hi, ya jai hi, usho ya hi, ya
I have had people say to me several times recently, well, the Amazon, that's so 1980s. When I got into this business in the 70s, people would say, well, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about population growth. So now when people say to me, who cares about the Amazon? We have to worry about global warming, climate change. Well, guess what? It's all the same thing. Overpopulation drives environmental destruction, which drives climate change. The first essentially global report of climate change was 25 years ago. The Kogi Indians of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in northern Colombia said, hey, what are you knuckleheads doing down there? Our glaciers are melting. And everybody thought, ha ha ha, isn't that cute? Look at those funny little white hats. But that was a report that the climate was changing. We didn't listen, and we failed to listen at our peril. People need to be interested because, look, whether you're interested in changing climate, whether you're interested in too many poor people, or whether you're interested in drug-resistant bacteria, which is a much greater threat to our species than climate change, deforestation, terrorism, nuclear weapons, you have an interest in the greatest expression of life on Earth, which is the rainforest, which is home to most of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. And if you look at the record, 80% of our antibiotics come from nature. And as a student of history, I know that history often predicts the future. So where are the best antibiotics waiting for us? In the rainforests of today.
Well, hey there, everybody. The rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. We've always known that it is a thing of beauty, but now we know there is so much more. My name is Renee Seiler, and I'm going to be your moderator for what promises to be an interesting, compelling, and informative 90 minutes. Ethnobotanist Mark Plotkin has spent over 40 years traveling to the Amazon, nurturing those relationships with the people there. And he has amazing stories to tell. He is the co-founder of the Amazon Conservation Team. And he's also the author of the 1993 best-selling book on the Amazon called Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice. But we're also going to talk about his latest book, which is The Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know. You know, he is described as the Indiana Jones of the Amazon, and the book itself is described as the go-to guide that reminds us what's at stake if we don't take action now. And I am pleased and thrilled to welcome Dr. Mark Plotkin to this broadcast. Hey, Mark.
Hi, Renee. Great to be here.
Mark, I'm so excited to talk to you. I have 1,000 questions, and I'm sure you have 1,000,000 answers. So let's dive right in. First of all, can we start with what exactly is an ethnobotanist?
Not the first time I've been asked that question. Very simply stated, an ethnobotanist is just a scientist who studies the relationship between people and plants. That could be a farmer in a cornfield in Iowa, or it could be a scientist trekking through the rainforest with a plant press, following behind a shaman, trying to find the secrets of the plants that heal. I'm in the latter category.
You know, the Amazon was a really big buzzword in the 80s. Everybody was talking about save the rainforest, and it was on everybody's mind. It seems like it's not so much anymore, at least for the lay people. I know that's not the case for you. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of the Amazon in the 80s versus now? What's happening? What are the differences, the changes that have been taking place there?
Well, in that video that I shared with you that you just showed, courtesy of the Skoll Foundation, which we're proudly supported by, it shows the connection between all things. And in the 80s, Save the Amazon, Save the Rainforest was the rallying cry for the environmental movement. And it kind of dropped off the radar. I mean, the Amazon didn't. The battles go on. But as I stated in the video at the outset, people said, well, it's not really important because we have to worry about population growth. Now people say, well, we don't have to worry about the rainforest until we deal with other issues like COVID. But frankly, COVID comes out of poor stewardship of nature. COVID, in an editorial I did for the LA Review of Books a few months ago, was caused when people abused wildlife in the so-called wet markets of China. My colleague Chris Walser at the Wildlife Conservation Society of the Bronx Zoo pointed out there's as many bad things living on mammals in the Amazon as in Southeast Asia. And destruction of rainforest, driving poor people into the rainforest, having these absolutely appalling markets for animals, for the pet trade or for eating, is what drives it. I mean, we caused this. And at the time where we turn on the TV and we see the Amazon burning down and we see these fires out of control in Brazil, in Napa, everywhere, this is being driven by deforestation. The number two cause of climate change, number two cause being the carbon released in the atmosphere, is primarily destruction of forests and primarily destruction of tropical rainforests. But there's good news too. An hour and a half ago, the president of Colombia, in partnership with local indigenous tribes and the Amazon Conservation Team, of which I'm the president, co-founder, along with Liliana Madrigal, declared a new reserve, the Anduche Reserve. It's an indigenous reserve. It's about 3/4 the size of Rhode Island. It hooks up next to Chiribiquete National Park, the largest national park in the Amazon, which was established by Colombian colleagues and my late mentor, Richard Schultes. So this is one of the most important biocultural corridors in the world. This is one of the biggest swaths of protected rainforest in the world. So yeah, there's plenty of bad news coming out of the Amazon, but there's good news as well. And we need to change the bad stuff and celebrate the good stuff.
Yeah, well, that sounds like something worth celebrating, actually, that breaking news. It's amazing.
Well, there's not enough good news in the world today. And we need to get the word out when we do. Environmentalists haven't been very good, haven't been very effective at getting their message across to the general public. And I think that's true of any disciplines. We're all siloed. Musicians talk to musicians typically. And I wrote this book, The Amazon, What Everybody Needs to Know, in an effort to get the word out. That, yes, I can publish in scientific journals, read by my fellow colleagues, but I want to reach a much broader audience, because what people don't know, they don't value. What they don't value, they destroy or allow to be destroyed. So the point of the work I'm talking about here, the work of the Amazon Conservation Team, involving people like our beloved board member, Tico Torres, is to reach a broader audience so people understand protecting the rainforest isn't some esoteric exercise for rich Americans who don't have anything better to do. It's about protecting life on Earth. And by protecting life on Earth, I'm talking about clean air, clean water, and new medicines. I'm an ethnobotanist. That's what I do. Work with shamans to document in their language the information so it's not lost as they make the transition from a pre-literate to a literate culture. One shaman I've been working with for 38 years knows and uses 300 different plants for medicinal purposes. And I know there's more he hasn't shown me yet.
Wow. I know. I'm so excited to get into some of this stuff with you. I feel like sometimes, like you said, we act like these things are unrelated, where climate change actually is a result of what's happening in the Amazon. And we see these horrible pictures of deforestation, and it's heartbreaking when you think about it. Here's a picture here. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, and we're all talking about how are we going to get to the other end of COVID. The people who live in the Amazon are also deeply impacted by COVID. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's happening there?
Well, first of all, COVID began in the tropics of the subtropics because of this abuse of wildlife. And at the same time that we're suffering terribly from this, indigenous peoples are suffering much more. The rates of infection, the rates of mortality in indigenous communities, particularly in the Amazon, but also much higher in North America as well, it's about twice of what industrialized societies are suffering. And I want to give a special shout out to our Navajo colleagues who had some of the highest rates of COVID infections in the world, and they still made it to the polling station to exercise their right to vote. And the point here being is that marginalized people tend to suffer at the margins much worse than the rest of us. And on the one hand, we're very lucky and need to appreciate that. But on the other hand, we need to do something about our indigenous or semi-indigenous or other peasant brothers and sisters. And here's why. Because it sounds sort of like, oh, let's just do this because it's nice. Actually, it's in our own self-interest. And here's why. Because poor communities are nests of infection and disease, particularly in the third world, where they don't have access to clean water, they don't have access to good food. And so by not reaching out to help them, by not reaching out to help protect the rainforest and keep their rivers clean, we're condemning them to a miserable life, and it comes back and affects us. The cost of COVID is going to be in the trillions. Look at the number of deaths. I mean, we really don't have an accurate idea of how many people are going to perish from this terrible disease. And it stems from abuse of wildlife and letting capitalism run wild instead of listening to what our colleagues, the Kogis, say. The Kogis are the guys dressed in white. You saw it in the video there. They live just to the north of the Amazon in coastal Colombia. But they're the most spiritual people I've ever met. And here's what the Kogis' lesson is for all of us. 30-70. Very simple. 30% of the world, lands, rivers, whatever, should be used for sustenance. 70% needs to be protected. If we do that, we're guaranteed a better tomorrow, because don't think that this pandemic is the end of it. Don't think that we have 3 vaccines. Thank you to Big Pharma for doing this. It's really terrific. But there's other pandemics behind it, and there are diseases much worse than COVID-19, much worse than coronaviruses. The African hemorrhagic fevers are much worse. And if we don't stop abusing the planet we live on, abusing the wildlife that we need to cohabit this planet with, we're going to pay an even more terrible price than we're paying now. And that's the focus of the Amazon Conservation Team, to build bridges between indigenous communities, between peasant communities, between academic communities, between governments, and try and work together. I did a film a couple of years ago with Jeff Bridges called Living in the Future's Past. And that film brought together an evangelical Christian who served in Congress and the former commander of NATO, General Wesley Clark. And they said, guys, we all need clean air. We all need clean water. The climate is changing. We need to work together for a better tomorrow, not just for us, but perhaps more importantly, for our kids and our grandkids. That's the spirit that drives the Amazon Conservation Team.
And it's such a simple message. You would think that, how are we not getting that? How is that not being understood? When you say we all need clean water and we all need clean air, or we're just not going to make it. It's such a simple message. I want to talk to you a little bit about your travels to the Amazon, and talk to me about the link between the forest and the tribal culture, if you could.
Well, I started going to the Amazon in the mid to late 70s, and I was an ethnobotanist looking to see what the people knew about plants, which of course was fantastic. And it quickly became clear to me that the knowledge wasn't being passed on, because like this great shaman, Natala, his grandkid, they weren't interested. This is considered old-fashioned. The missionaries actively discouraged the transmission of the knowledge. The missionaries actively discouraged the use of traditional medicines. Use the white man's medicine. It's better. And I saw that where the Indians thrived, the forest thrived. They were the best protectors of the rainforest. To put it more simply, where there was forest, there were indigenous peoples. And where there were indigenous peoples that had a thriving culture, they were kept together by my great teacher, the jaguar shaman. That the Indians are the glue that hold the forest down, and the shamans are the glue that hold the cultures together. So you really need both. And that was the birth of what we call biocultural conservation. And that's why many of us who had worked for other better known environmental organizations decided we would take this approach. We would focus on indigenous lands and work with empowering indigenous peoples, not doing it for them or trying to tell them what to do, which doesn't work, and giving them the ability to deal with the outside world, giving them the ability to seize control of their cultural and environmental destiny and manage these forests, manage these fates, manage these rivers for their betterment and actually eventually for ours as well.
So have you seen a reversal in, you said the younger sort of generation doesn't want to hear from the older shamans or what have you? Have you seen a reversal in that? Is there sort of an uptick in now trying to pass on? We want to learn, the younger generation wants to learn some of the things that the older generation knows?
Uptick, yes. With the support of Tico Torres, for example, we helped produce environmental literature in their language, which they'd never seen before. The only book they had in their language, if they had a book in their language, was the Bible brought in by the missionaries. So by writing down their stuff, it added value to the culture. By talking to them about how their medicine could sometimes cure stuff that our own medicine could not, it gave value to their culture. And this was the creation of the Shamans Apprentice program, where the young guys got it. They saw the value of their culture to the outside world, and especially the value of their own culture. An example of the Waiwais that we work with in Guyana, formerly British Guiana in the Northeast Amazon. The missionaries came in, forbid them from using their own medicine. The shamans died kind of a broken heart. And then the missionaries left because of political instability, and the indigenous peoples are left with nothing. They had no shamans. They had no shamanic medicine. Nobody knows which plants to use. And the Western medicine was gone with the wind. So it's helping people make informed decision about their culture, about their fate, about their medicine. That is our approach, much more so than telling them what they should do or shouldn't do.
Wow. We're using the term shaman or shaman. Is one preferred, or are they both okay?
As a botanist, let me say tomato.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter because they don't use those words. The most common words for healer in the Amazon is PI or page. And there's many manifestations, curandero, herbalista, but shaman, tomato.
Okay, perfect. What exactly is a shaman then? Is it a medicine man, or is that a Western way of thinking of it? What is a shaman?
Is typically a medicine man, sometimes a woman. We can talk more about that. But he is first and foremost, or she is first and foremost, a healer. But they're also doing divination. They're also controlling the weather. They're also psychopomps. They steer the dead to the underworld. They're astronomers. This is one-stop shopping in terms of indigenous wisdom. They're the legend keepers. They're the story keepers. They're the medicine keepers. This is one of the greatest shamans I ever had the honor and pleasure to work with. This was the paramount shaman of the Wayana tribe in the Northeast Amazon.
Wow. You said there are women. Do the men and the women do the same type of healing, the same sorts of services, for lack of a better term? Do they do the same thing for the Amazon people?
Let me speak in general terms here, Renee. You got between 300 and 400 tribes of indigenous peoples in the Amazon. So you can't say the medicine man does this or doesn't do this. It's a generalization. But like most generalizations, they hold a lot of truth. In the tribes that I know best, you have medicine men, but the women know medicines, particularly for female and child disorders. For example, problems in childbirth, children's ailments, thrush, a little infection they get around the mouth. And you do have some women who just said, I don't care what the custom is, I'm a shaman. There was one with a trio that I worked with years. Now, interestingly enough, I know two tribes, that one in Peru and one in the southern part of Mexico, Oaxaca, among the magic mushroom cults, where the women are the shamans. So the predominant shamans are women with these tribes. This is a fascinating question. Why that's the case, I don't really know. Hopefully there's some fledgling female ethnobotanists out there that can go down there and find out.
So I just want to real briefly step in here and tell people that this is an opportunity to ask questions. If you're watching us wherever you are, please go ahead and leave a question or a comment. This is your chance now to talk to Dr. Mark Plotkin and learn more about what he's been doing, the Amazon conservation team, learn more about the breaking news that he was talking about at the beginning of this broadcast. Also want to remind people that they can get your latest book, which is the fifth, by the way, which is, I have it right here, the Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know. So, and they can get that on Amazon, ironically. All right. So during COVID, are the shamans doing anything specifically to help to stay healthy, to heal during COVID?
When you're working with people and trying to impart lessons, it's sometimes illustrative to see what happens when you're not looking. Okay. And one of the high points of my entire professional life, my entire life, is I was sent a picture. Now, all the Indians have WhatsApp. All the indigenous peoples have WhatsApp, or not the uncontacted ones, but most of the ones we work with. And I got pictures of the Shamans Apprentice Clinic that was set up by our indigenous colleagues as part of the Shamans Apprentice program. And it showed them brewing up immunostimulating plants and handing them out to the entire village. To be clear, this has not been tested in the laboratory. So I don't want to say, yeah, they got a cure for COVID. It's not a cure, it's a preventative, they say. But we do know that there are immunostimulating plants they use that are, in fact, immunostimulants. They're effective. Cat's claw, which is found in every herbal store in the industrialized world, comes from the Amazon, was first learned of from Amazonian shamans, and was studied in Germany and found that it does increase the production of white blood cells. It is effectively stimulating your immune system. So this is what's so endlessly fascinating. They're not sitting on stuff that they figured out 5,000 years ago and not learning and experimenting. Just like with our own medicine, all medicine has to move forward, and all medicine has to try and deal with new diseases, new conditions, find new effective treatments that may not have side effects.
Mark, someone's coming in with a question here. First of all, congrats on the book. Question: in the U.S., COVID response has been hotly debated, i.e. masks versus no masks. Do you see the same philosophical divide in the indigenous communities that you work with?
It's an excellent question. And the honest answer is I left the Amazon in February and haven't been back. So I got out, one of the last planes out. Fact is that in these tribal societies, you really don't tend to have the political divisions as deeply and as bitterly as we're seeing in our own country now and other Western democracies, in Eastern Europe in particular. So I'm generalizing here when I say that you don't have the anti-maskers versus the pro-maskers based on what I'm hearing, and I'm talking to these guys all the time. But this is conjecture. This is not based on years of fieldwork because this is all very new to us. Remember, a year ago, none of us had ever heard of this virus.
Wow. Okay. I wanted to ask you about the, well, can we just talk about cocktails for a second? Because I know that there is something related to cocktail culture that comes from the Amazon. And so I brought my wine here, Mark, because there are grapes, right? And all kinds of great things, not just medicinal, come out of the Amazon. So cheers to you and our discussion. And tell me a little bit, I'll let you take a sip. How about I babble on for a second? Well, no, I'm kidding. Mark, talk to me about what comes out of the Amazon culture in terms of wine and grapes.
Well, Tiki culture has undergone a renaissance in the last decade, driven by people like Beach Bum Berry that runs the coolest bar in the French Quarter, my hometown in New Orleans. And this is based to a large degree on tropical products. I mean, what's the ultimate tiki drink? The pina colada. Pineapples come from the Amazon and coconuts come from the South Seas in India. So this whole cocktail culture is based on tropical plants. Here's the good news. We haven't exhausted what's out there, that there are 500 edible fruits alone in the Western Amazon. Just in Peru. This is based on the study done by my colleague, Nigel Smith. And so we're always looking for new and interesting things to eat and drink. The good news is that people like this, like my friends the trios in the Northeast Amazon, are going to be the ones to teach them to us. But there are lessons in a glass of wine, since you brought it up, and that's this. Wine is the most important medicinal plant in the world, bar none. It's not opium, it's not cannabis. Wine is worth $300 billion a year. I have a paper coming out on Herbalgram in 2 weeks that goes into this in greater detail. But here's what you need to know from a conservation standpoint. There are 1,368 varieties of grape that have been made into wine. But in our quest to get rid of diversity, 80% of the wines we drink are based on 20 varieties of grapes.
Oh,
Here's why
wow.
that's bad news. When you just grow a few types of things for miles and miles and miles and miles, it's an invitation to pests and diseases. And remember, all these varieties of wine are just one species. So it shows the value of diversity within a species and without. And here's another thing to consider that ties the Amazon back into this, that one of our most important, one of our most promising and useful biodegradable pesticides is Lonchocarpus. Lonchocarpus is the plant that Tico and I saw in Suriname called Neku. It is a liana, a woody vine like what Tarzan used to swing on through the rainforest, although that was actually, the back lot was at the LA Arboretum. And it is crushed and thrown into the water where it stuns fish. I have a whole chapter on this in the new book. The fish come to the surface, the Indians pick them off, and the fish is completely edible because it stuns them. It's not a poison. But we use this as a biodegradable pesticide in modern agriculture. And there's many, many, many toxic, poisonous plants in the rainforest, arrow poisons, snake poisons that are being looked at now for therapeutic purposes and potentially for agricultural purposes. One of the greatest quotes ever in ethnobotany was from 500 years ago from Paracelsus, who was the father of tincture of opium. That's what he's best known for. And he said, the dose makes the poison. What he was saying was something that in small doses can heal you, in big doses can kill you. If you take 2 aspirins, your headache goes away. If you take 100 aspirins, you'll die.
Oh.
And so there's now a refocus on the natural world of poisons, which ethnobotanists like me never thought of as therapeutic. We looked at arrow poison. Some of those made it into modern medicine. But now we're going back and saying to the indigenous peoples, what do you use as a poison? What do you use to kill rats? What do you use to kill leafcutter ants? And think there's got to be something interesting here in terms of the chemicals.
You a second ago, we were talking about sort of the medicines and medicinal plants, and how some of them had made their way to Germany and were being used to increase white blood cell count in some cases. What is the reaction to from Western doctors, Western culture, when this type of medicine makes its way into everyday use?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because people are people, and you have doctors who think this is all nonsense and mumbo jumbo, and you have doctors who can't get enough of it. Most people are in between. If it works, they're interested. The world expert on the history of wine is a fellow named Pat McGovern at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. And he was in Austria doing some research in a museum and had a terrible toothache. And the dentist said, no problem. I've got this stuff from the Amazon. You're going to be right as rain. And he applied it, and the toothache just went away almost instantaneously. And it took me weeks to find out what that was. And it came from the Amazon. I had to contact my friend Glenn Shepard, a fellow ethnobotanist, and he said, oh, yeah, I know what that is. That's the stuff they put in soup in Brazil that numbs your gums. And so something that's a culinary herb to the Brazilians becomes a powerful and effective medicine to dentists in Austria. I mean, how cool is that? I think one of the great things about the period in which we're living is the increasing open-mindedness, more of the general public than the medical community. I mean, when I was a kid growing up in New Orleans, medicine meant one thing: white guys in white coats that gave you pills and gave you shots. That was it. No massage, no music therapy, no visualization, no Chinese medicine. And now the mainstreaming of hallucinogens, particularly from the tropics, is revolutionizing the treatment of many mental ailments: PTSD, schizophrenia, depression. Now, this is not a panacea. This is not a cure-all. But this is the shamanic medicine par excellence. In the hands of the shaman, in the hands of the medicine man or medicine woman, hallucinogens are vegetable scalpels. And what I mean by that is they can get into your head, they can get into your brain, they can analyze it, they can diagnose it, they can treat it, and they can sometimes cure things that our own physicians and psychiatrists cannot. And Tico has experienced some of this with me in terms of ceremony with some of the great shamans, just to see the kind of, there we are on a boat in the Northeast Amazon, visiting a village in one of the ethnoeducation projects that he was involved with. And maybe we could ask him to share.
We're going to get to him too. That's Tico Torres. We can't wait to get to him. I just real quickly, I want to ask you a couple of other questions. Mark, I know that some medicines that are found in the Amazon are also used for the treatment of PTSD. And how is that received?
How is it received here?
Yes.
Well, I think
it's being used at Johns Hopkins, I think.
Landmark development in this field was spearheaded by my pal Tim Ferriss, who helped start an institute at Johns Hopkins. Now, Johns Hopkins, this isn't Berkeley, okay? This is pretty staid, traditional Western medicine. And they saw that this stuff works. And this is psilocybin from the magic mushrooms that were discovered by my mentor, Richard Schultes, amongst the Mazatec peoples, the female shamans in southern Mexico. And Schultes always said, ethnobotanists don't discover anything. The indigenous peoples show us and teach us. Also involving mescaline, which comes from the peyote that Schultes again did the seminal work with amongst the Kiowa in Oklahoma, and even now the use of ayahuasca from the Amazon. Ayahuasca is the vine of the soul. It's the most potent and popular tropical hallucinogen of all. It's found now from India to Istanbul to Israel to Indonesia. You can buy it on the internet, but it's a very dangerous thing to do because, as I talk about in the new podcast, these are the plants of the gods, and they can heal you or they can hurt you. They're not to be trifled with. These are plants of power. These are plants of knowledge. These are plants of danger. And just like a scalpel, it needs to be wielded by an expert. This is not something that you take lightly and treat it like a cold beer or a joint you smoke in your backyard. This is serious stuff and needs to be treated with the respect that's due to it.
You know, it's almost like we understand the power of it, but you just can see somebody traipsing through there and, oh, I think I'm going to have a bite of this or something like that. And you're saying, absolutely do not do that. I know that you've experienced some of these things yourself. Obviously you were led through these experiences with a shaman. Can you tell us about any of those experiences?
Well, I can share an experience that's featured in my new podcast, The Plants of the Gods. And this is about taking epena, the sacred snuff of the Yanomami people, on the Brazil-Venezuela border. This would have been the mid-'80s. So let me open my journal here. And I talk about the first time I entered the Shabano, the roundhouse, and the shaman invited me to sit with him, which I was happy to do. And we tried to talk a bit, which was very difficult because he didn't speak hardly any Spanish and I didn't speak any Yanomami. And then I just smiled as he reached up into the rafters and pulled out this thing in which he said, Moko Hiro. And I smiled, and then I realized what it was. It was a snuff pipe. So he began filling it up, and I began saying, well, maybe tomorrow. I mean, I want to do the, well, there it is. So let me read what happened as this picture was taken. The force of the blast seemed to propel the drug from the shaman's tube directly into my bloodstream, and then into my very soul. Although my heart pounded painfully in my chest, a subtle sense of exhilaration accompanied the pain that racked my body. At the edge of my field of vision, tiny figures began to dance. My nose started to run, but my vision cleared a bit. I saw indigenous peoples in other parts of the roundhouse point at me and break into enormous grins. Some of them stopped what they were doing, chatting to each other in their hammocks, carving arrow points for the hunt, making their own batch of snuff, and they sat in a circle with me at the center. I felt a warm bond of brotherhood with them. As the snuff coursed through my body, The indigenous people spoke in their native language, which I now seem to understand. One of them patted me on the back and another stroked my arm. Overwhelmed by the sense of belonging, I pointed to the epena on the banana leaf in front of me. More, I said to the shaman, although it sounded as if someone else's voice was speaking. The shaman loaded the pipe and blew the epena into my right nostril, refilled it and blew it into my left. I sensed he was giving me a subnormal dose and blowing the snuff much more gently than the indigenous peoples did amongst themselves. Even so, I was beginning to hallucinate. More, I said. I wanted the full experience. By now, my senses had been severely altered. My hearing was especially acute. I felt as if I could hear everything in the roundhouse. My field of vision had greatly expanded. It was as if I was looking at the world through a wide-angle lens. At the edge of my field of vision, the little figures began to dance.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And you were looking forward to that experience. Would you do it again?
It's my job.
Exactly. Quick question here. Mark, Thank you. Have you studied to be a shaman? If so, has it impacted your life?
No, I'm an ethnobotanist, not a shaman, not even a shaman's apprentice. When I entitled my book, my first book, Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice, it was a bit of a trick because the shaman's apprentices were my guides, but my guides were not interested in shamanic medicine, but because they were paid to lead me through the forest and translate what the shaman was saying, they learned much more than I did, and they became the apprentices. Here you see Koita in front of me, one of the first shaman's apprentices, and behind me, you see the jaguar shaman, my first teacher. But they became shaman's apprentices, and I'm proud to report they are now shamans.
Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Mark, we have so much to cover still. Want to remind people that we are here talking about Dr. Mark Plotkin's newest book. It is The Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know. You can get it on Amazon, ironically enough, Amazon.com. There's the book there. Also, Mark, your other books are available as well. We've talked about Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice. That is also available on Amazon. Want to also make sure that people understand that they can learn more about your work and the things that you're doing at
AmazonTeam.org.
AmazonTeam.org. Sorry. I'm looking at 37 Post-it notes over here. Sorry about that, Mark. The Amazon Conservation Team, and the address, the email, the URL is AmazonTeam.org. Okay. You have mentioned Tico several times, so I think it's time that we go ahead and bring him in as well. And he is, for music fans out there, this is really a real treat. And I wonder how many of them know this about Tico. So he is also a board member at ACT. He is a founding member, drummer, and songwriter for the Bon Jovi band. Now, hi, I graduated from high school in 1981. Hi, I know Bon Jovi. In his long career, he's played with such greats as Miles Davis, Chuck Berry, Cher, and Pat Benatar. And then in 2008, he founded the Tico Torres Children Foundation to fight hunger, disease, homelessness, neglect, abuse, and illness among children in need. And we are really, really excited to bring in Tico Torres. Hey, Tico.
Hi, Renee. How you doing, Mark?
Good. Good to see you. And cheers to you, because I know you. So cheers. We're here talking about the Amazon and your work there, and really excited that you've decided to join us for this. So tell us a little bit about the work that you've done with ACT and what drew you to it. What do you get from it?
Well, I think what drew me to is the first time I met Mark. I was enamored with him, especially the way he put his heart and soul and everything a human can into something that I was oblivious to, in a sense. You hear about it, and like you were saying before, save the rainforest, you hear a lot of things, and you try to do that. And through Mark's tales of not only how he worked with the indigenous tribes and learning about the plants and the people and the ecology of the Amazon, which is so important. Having a child, in my mind, made me really want to help and be part of this, because it's the future of our children. And I guess the most Oh yeah, that's my son, and we were out with the Kogis in Santa Marta in Colombia, and but that puts some things in perspective. He's a man that follows his dream. His dream is to spread the word on something that we take for granted every day, and being part of this is a small part. But to get out the message and to be in such good company and learn and go out there and see for yourself. And I think if everyone could, I mean, through this, you'll see as much as possible. But if you can get out and vibe and be with the people and see what's going on down here, it'll truly change your mind about the world.
You're a musician, so I'm guessing that you know, like art. Oh, sure. Yeah. Nothing but like 40, 50 years or 40 years in the business. I'm assuming that you create or you hear things that inspire. Do you feel particularly inspired when you're in the rainforest, in the Amazon?
Yeah. I mean, close your eyes. It's musical. I mean, from every animal and every leaf and every insect, especially at night, has amazing rhythm. You got to understand that music is spirituality, and the art of music in the jungle and the people is spirituality. And a funny story, when we were with the Kogis, and I had a wonderful opportunity to be there. There's about 90 that came down from the Andes, and late at night, I stood with 3 elders and a wonderful person, Santos, that was a translator, but I'm sorry to say he passed with COVID. But and they wanted to, even though we spoke the different languages, they wanted to hear the ocean. So I poured sand on a rock, and started rubbing it, and made the sound of the ocean. And for some reason, that resonated with them, where they accepted me as part of that little group that night, which was as spiritual as you can get. It was beautiful.
Wow. I know you and Mark have worked on educational programs in the Amazon market, talked about making sure that some of the indigenous peoples had printed materials in their own tongue, native tongue, and how important that is. Talk to me about, either one of you can jump in on this, how that's so important to you, what that's done for you, how that's changed you, as well as the impact that it's had on the people that you've worked with.
I mean, I guess, Mark, I told him, I said, I work with children. Is there something we could do with children in the Amazon? And with Mark and Lillian, his better half, we were able to start a school. And in that school was a school for shaman, for young children coming in that could actually learn from shamans that would come in at different times and teach. And he could also sleep there and learn the ways of the shaman and the jungle and the medicines. The book was very important because it also not only is something to work with, but it was also for the capaceros to look at people that are not involved in that, to learn and how to help their own life and how to do for themselves. You can't just give money and expect things to happen. You have to, and the part of the beauty of this at ACT is to show how they can do it themselves. And the school took off. There's now 12 schools now.
Mark, I know, Mark, you've spoken about that. It's not about throwing a bunch of money. It's about really empowering and making sure, you've talked about mapping and the importance of mapping and making sure that it's not just about, throwing money at an issue, but about empowerment.
I run a not-for-profit organization, but there are certainly similarities in the for-profit world that people overlook. It's easy to spend money badly in any place. Investments, not-for-profit projects. So what we try and do is run a tight ship that raises money and spends it exceedingly well. Today is Giving Tuesday. I hope if any of this touches people out there, they'll send in some donations to our website or make holiday gifts as donations. And that's the kind of thing that we will put to use very well. Here's a concrete number, Renee. We're facing COVID in the Amazon. It's sweeping through there. It's killed a lot of tribal leaders, really beloved tribal leaders like Tico's friend Santos, Aretana, the great chief of the Awalapiti in the Xingu in Brazil. But ACT to date has put 35 tons into the hands of our indigenous colleagues. Now, that is PPE, that is emergency food supplies, that is soap, other sanitary supplies, that is posters in the indigenous language saying wear a mask, saying wash your hands, stuff like that. It's not easy to do this work without COVID. Okay, it's not easy to do this work without all the fires, but we're persevering. And as I said, as a student of history, an amateur student of history, the past predicts the future. If we can make change happen in the past, we can continue to do it and we can do it better. So the aim is not to raise as much money as we can. That's never been what we're all about. It's to raise the money necessary to get the job done. To date, ACT, founded 25 years ago, has partnered with over 55 indigenous tribes in South America to map and improve management of 80 million acres of ancestral lands. Pretty good for an organization most people haven't heard of. 55 tribes, 80 million acres.
Wow. And the mapping is important so that what they, we talked about it sort of, I told everybody that I had your ear offline, but can you explain why mapping matters?
Well, if you don't map it, you don't own it. And if you don't map it, somebody else does, and they have a claim on it. More land has been claimed with maps and with bullets and swords. So they need to have their own maps. But there are many additional benefits. This is right near the area near the Aduche Reserve that was just created this afternoon. Special shout out to the Colombian government, the indigenous peoples, and the ACT Colombia team that put this all together. But when you map, you're not only claiming land, you're finding new resources. When we did the first map, we found 13 stands of Brazil nuts, which are now being managed sustainably. You learn what the boundaries of your lands are, and you put up signs to keep people out. You put up villages at the border to keep people out. You also teach technology in a culturally sensitive way. In a lot of places, they fly into villages and they give them a bunch of dreck and they fly off. Well, if you give them solar panels and you don't teach them how to maintain it or repair it, and you give them GPSs and you don't tell them what it's good for, what's the point? Except you're kind of dazzling them. Oh, look what the outside world has that we don't have. Look how smart they are. But by introducing mapping, we introduced the tools, the GPS, and they use it in a culturally sensitive way. And I'll leave that picture on the screen because look at the semiotics of what we're showing here. Okay, the indigenous man is holding the GPS. There's the ACT cartographer at the top of the picture, but he's not making the map. He's coaching the guy. He's encouraging the guy. He's training the guy. And that's our role. We're riding shotgun.
Real quickly, just want to say hello from the team of FICA Amazonia. I hope I said that right. Thank you for this inspiring talk for so many people to work for the Amazon and for the environment with the little green plant there. Awesome. I'm loving this because I think it's a lot of things that we kind of gloss over. We don't think about when you talked about people coming in and just dropping in all the bright and shiny toys. They get to pat themselves on the back. Look what we've done. They go out to a nice big dinner, and the Amazon goes to the bottom of the list for them, or to the back burner again. And what you guys are doing at the Amazon conservation team, the work that Tico's doing, you guys, you're keeping this front and center because it is very important for all of us, obviously, as we see.
Well, people like Tico and Jeff Bridges, who's also on our board, they turbocharge our efforts because Tico and the Bon Jovi band have a megaphone, millions of people around the world across the generational divide. Jeff Bridges making a movie for 50 years, one of the most beloved. There we are horsing around with a new iPhone. And they can get our message out in ways that we cannot. And so having people of good faith and good heart like Tico and Jeff make our job a lot easier. So hats off to them. There's Tico at the foot of a Sumauma tree, the second biggest tree in the Amazon, the great kapok tree, and a sacred tree to many tribal cultures.
It's awesome to see Tico and Jeff, who are really sort of leading with their hearts. It's not like they're just giving their name. This is actually important to them. How is Jeff doing, by the way? Mark, we know he's a board member. And
I talked to Jeff a couple of weeks ago, and he's had some recent challenge, but he seems to be doing well. And I'm hearing from people that I haven't talked to in decades said, "Oh, you're pals with the dude. Tell him I wish him well." So that's kind of a good sign. Same thing with Tico. People are like, "Wow, you really know Tico Torres? That's amazing." When I started playing the drums in high school, I would listen to Bon Jovi records to figure out how to do this stuff. But I'm sure they never got to do it as well as he did.
From Madeline Fulton, Mark, read your latest book and learned so much. Can't wait to read it again, as well as listen to the new podcast. Thank you for bringing your wisdom and such important knowledge to the public. Loving these comments. So please, wherever you are watching, go ahead. This is your opportunity to ask Mark Plotkin a question. You can also ask Tico Torres about his work. And leave a comment. Please do not forget to head over to amazonteam.org. This is, as Mark pointed out, this is Giving Tuesday, and I can't think of a better cause to give to, as we've spent the last hour or so talking about. So please do make sure, if you're watching this and you don't want to leave a comment, you can leave money to the organization, which, as you heard Mark say, is still doing amazing things, even with COVID as the backdrop. We're really struggling. People with resources are struggling. So you can imagine what it's like for people who do not as much. Mark, let me just ask you real quickly, what other services that ACT provides? And also, we talked about women shamans. What's the role of women conservationists?
Well, I've been asked, how come ACT is so good at what it does? And I said, well, here's the secret sauce. We're a matriarchy. Okay. Tico's nodding his head. Our co-founder is a woman. The head of our Columbia Northwest Amazon program is a woman. The head of our Northeast Amazon program is a woman. There's Liliana, who is not only our co-founder, but is one of the co-founders of the Costa Rican National Park System, which is, of course, the most famous protected area system in Central America. And our entire finance department are women. So, I get out of the way a lot of my professional life. I'm smart enough to do that.
You're and that's smart why, man.
Yeah. But I'll give you a concrete example here. I was in the Miriti Paraná, one of the most remote regions in the world. This is in the Colombian Amazon. It took me about 3 days to get to the village from Bogota. I'm not talking about from Kennedy Airport. And we're trying to craft an idea of working with the tribes to empower them, put a little money in their pocket in a culturally sensitive way that didn't involve destroying anything. And the three chiefs of the three tribe, they couldn't agree. One tribe said, we're bigger, so we should get a bigger piece of the pie. And finally, the chief's wife called me over and said, "Oh, I want to talk to you." And I said, "What's up?" She says, "Listen, we're not into all this boy crap." She said, the three wives of the three chiefs will get shit done. So just work this out with us, and we'll pretend that was their idea. And
I
it
love
worked out
it.
Fine. So
that should be on a t-shirt. The three wives get shit done.
Yeah, exactly. That could be our motto. But, another point to tie this into an earlier question, Renee, is that women hold a different landscape in their minds. And so when we did the mapping, we started doing the mapping with the men for a variety of reasons, but then we invited the women in, and they said they didn't want to work with the men. They want to make their own maps. Now, the men in these tribes tend to be shamans and hunters, so they're going far afield every day. The women are, like women in most societies, doing a lot of the hardest work, keeping the family together, raising the kids, doing the agriculture. So their maps were much more detailed, much more close in. And so we end up with complementary maps of the near agricultural fields and the forest, which we never would have got if we just went in there and worked with the men, or if we'd have just gone in there and worked with the women. Now, one of the things we're most proud of at ACT is we work with female shamans in the Colombian Amazon to create an organization called ASOMI, which is a group of female herbalists and shamans. These are all part of the ayahuasca culture, because they said that they wanted their own plot of forest to protect and manage for medicinal plants. And that, again, they honored the men who were the famous taitas, the famous shamans, but they had their own medicine that needed to be protected. And the ones that looked after the taitas were the women, the female healers and shamans in some cases, because they had a different, overlapping but different set of medicines and healing approaches.
Wow. And Mark, real quickly, are the women and men is there obviously there's a division of the sexes, but are women seen as lesser than, and I only ask that because in some cases, obviously here in the United States, we have some issues with, women not, making as much money as men, those sorts of things. Are they equal in terms of their work and their worth?
Well, as an ethnobotanist, I'm not really qualified to comment on this as an expert. I will say that the women certainly seem to be the equal, and in some cases control more of the power and more of the plants. And again, we're talking about many, 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 many tribes. And in the case of the Maroons, the descendants of escaped slaves living in places like Suriname and Brazil, these are matriarchies. And the women are definitely more powerful in terms of controlling resources and making decisions. So that goes back to my point about being too general. If somebody said, well, in America are men and women equal, and you'd have to give a long explanation because, in some ways they are, in some obvious ways they aren't. In some cases they're the same. In some cases the women's have the upper hand. What do you think, Tico?
Can you hear us, Tico?
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm back on.
Oh, so what do you think the women have the same kind of, I guess, worth or is it different? They do different things and therefore they're both worthy in different ways?
Completely. I mean, they're stronger in so many ways. And I mean, that I remember being, I was brought up by two women. And when I had an ailment as a child, like Mark was saying earlier, my grandmother would go in the backyard. She's an old Cuban woman, and she'd go, born in the 1800s, go in the backyard and pick some herbs, which she'd do some kind of concoction for me, put it in a pan. And by the time I got rid of a fever, I got rid of my chest cold. I mean, they just know how to do it. So around my house, it was always the women were the boss. Going there, like you said, there's men have their jobs. They're the hunter-gatherers. And the women have theirs, which they run the household. They run everything. And I think a man would not survive without them. I mean, so I don't think I think there's a complete equality, more so that I've seen when we were down there than I hear at times. Yeah.
Yep, I agree with that. But Renee, let me jump in here because there's another important point I want to make that before we move on to something else. One of the major services you asked about that we do is land titling. Land titling basically gets Indians, indigenous peoples, or Maroon peoples, Afro-American peoples, title to their lands, which is absolutely necessary. I mean, what you don't own, you can't protect. And we have done this exceedingly well and successfully, particularly in Colombia. In the last decade alone, we've titled close to 1 million hectares. And that's essentially half of all indigenous titling that's been done in the country in 10 years, was done by ACT. We have a crackerjack director who is also a lawyer, who also was number 2 at the National Park Service, one of the best national park services in Latin America. And we have fought long and hard to bring this to fruition. And this is part of the mapping process, because you need a map before you can get a title. But once you have a map, if you don't have a title, it's not very useful. And this is part of what led to this great news that we announced at the top of the hour for people that tuned in late, that this new reserve on Duce has just been declared this afternoon. And it was a partnership between the indigenous peoples, first and foremost, the Colombian government, hats off to them, and the Amazon conservation team. And land titling is an essential part of the conservation process. It's not sexy. It's not like shamans looking for cures for COVID or cancer or anything like that, but it's fundamental to what we do. And our track record is, in the rainforest at least, is second to none.
Yeah, love it. Love to hear that. Mark, here's a question from Laura Chamberlain. Mark, would you please give us an update about the forest fires? Is Bolsonaro still burning the Amazon down?
The fires are as bad this year as they were last year. There's lots of reasons to be concerned. The regime in power in Brazil is very anti-environmental, and they were very closely tied to the current regime in this country. Now, I am a tree hugger from the get-go, but I believe that environmentalists, like human rights people, need to build bridges wherever possible. And the fact is that with these changes here in this country, I think it's going to have a ripple effect elsewhere. Very few people, even in the environmental movement, know that Joe Biden gave two beautiful statements about the importance of protecting forests, particularly the Amazon forest. This was unprompted. This wasn't in front of an environmental audience. And I think that offers a great deal of hope for the future, not just here, because let's face it, people look to this country to see what we're doing and what we're saying. And I'm much more hopeful right now than I've been in a long time.
Yeah. I'd like to add, Mark and Renee, when I was down there last year in Brazil, and in the big cities, the Brazilians themselves are not privy to what's going on in the west of the country. It's because their news outlets and everything that comes into them, it simply said, well, it's very good for you. It's for farming. But honestly, the real people there that live there have no idea the destruction that's going on on the other side. So again, how do you get that out? And that part of the message is not only to our hemisphere, but also down there. It's important to press that message through.
Tico, since you were the last one to speak, I want to ask you, because I think for all of us, Mark says he hadn't been back to the Amazon since February. COVID really stopped all of us in our tracks. We had to figure out a new way to make it work, a new way to work. How does a rock band who travels for a living, what do you do when you're sort of sidelined by something like COVID? And what have you been doing?
Well, we had a tour. It's kind of like interesting. I mean, look, we had to learn how to. We had a tour set up June, July. We canceled it and gave all the money back. We didn't know how long this was going to go for. We thought it was important to do that. We were able to do a record in the meantime, and it was going to be a May release. We decided to hold it. There's a couple of new songs that went on there that John wrote. It's a socially conscious record of what's going on in the past year. And some good storytelling in it about what we're going through, some positive messages. And we were able to release it, via internet October 2nd. We did a live edition of a documentary of the record as well. I think the hardest thing for the world is music's such a big part of the world. And not being able to go and perform and go see the bands that you like and the music that you like is difficult for people. If you look back in history, even at the darkest times, people would find money to go to have a day off and have time to see some kind of entertainment. And because of COVID, it's very difficult for everybody to do that. I mean, there's actors, there's comedians, and musicians that are struggling quite a bit because you can only do so much via internet, and thank God we have that at least. But we can't wait actually to get back and be able to touch and people's life. There's a spiritual thing about music, and I think it's important that we get that back. So I'm wishing for the best very soon.
I did see a bit of the documentary that you guys filmed in Nashville, and I loved it. I felt like it was I know it's different, and it was a different experience from actually seeing your fans, but I also felt like there was an intimate look at you guys that sometimes you don't see from, so far away. Yeah,
I mean, again, we had not seen each other for months and months, and everything we did was viral. So virtual, I should say. And it was nice to actually look at each other. And we all got COVID tested before we went in, wore masks until we got behind our instruments. And it was nice to look at each other and just something we've been doing for almost 40 years. To be able to do it again, it was a lot of fun. And I did watch it myself, and it turned out nice. And I see what you mean about intimacy. That's sort of like sitting in our basement playing for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really great. It was different, and I understand that this is what you do for a living and what you've done for so long. But it was a cool thing to watch. So really got a good look at you guys up close and personal. So on a night like this, Bon Jovi 2020. So Mark, I want to talk to you also about your new project coming up, which drops tomorrow, because you're not busy enough. You just haven't done enough. You releasing a book and now a podcast. You should. And what else? I mean, you're always going. You are always doing things. So tell us about Plants of the Gods.
Well, I have to blame my two daughters for this, because a couple of years ago I did a TED Talk, and after that they said, Dad, TED's kind of passé. Podcasts are the name of the game these days. You're so old-fashioned. So I thought, why not? And my mentor, Schultes, in partnership with Albert Hofmann, the inventor of LSD, did a book called Plants of the Gods, which is the world's 10 greatest, most important hallucinogens. And their perspective was that human culture, human religion, even, we tend to think of minor religions, which I always thought was insulting and demeaning. We talk about tribal religions or great religions. What makes them great compared to somebody else's religion are founded and grounded in spiritual experiences, which can most easily be explained in terms of hallucinogens. So there's actually quite a number of good podcasts out there on different aspects of hallucinogens, but none on the ethnobotany. So I thought I would take my personal experience as an ethnobotanist and talk about it from a cultural perspective. First and foremost, the role in the tribal societies themselves, and then to grow it out to the impact on our culture. There's a great new book out called The Immortality Key. It's on the bestseller list last year. So it talks about the hypothesis that Christianity was based on hallucinogenic plants based on stuff they found in some of the most ancient chalices, and ties it back into ancient Greek religions, the Eleusinian mysteries, the Dionysian mysteries, and shows that maybe much of what we think about not only history, but about the history of religion in particular, may be wrong. Now, this is not news to any ethnobotanist, because we're obsessed with the idea that plants play a much greater role in the evolution of societies. My mentor, Schultes, would always say, the problem with history is written by historians. And they don't really know all that much about plants. So we got to rewrite it ourselves. And that is what led to the birth of Plants of the Gods. Right now we have about 10 episodes, one on the Yanomami hallucinogens, another on ayahuasca, another on the ethnobotany of wine, which is, after all, a mind-altering plant compound. So the idea is to take a different take and hopefully reach a different audience and have fun with it in a way where the science is accurate, the history is accurate, and it shows we need to take much better care of the plants because they've taken very good care of us.
Definitely. We have a clip I'd like to play so we can hear that. We'll roll it.
When the shaman leans forward and passes you the cup of ayahuasca or the mokohiro filled with hallucinogenic snuff, the anthropologist says, no, I can't do that. I'll lose my objectivity and won't be able to take notes. Whereas the ethnobotanist leans forward and says, yeehaw.
I love it. Yeehaw. Is that what you do, Mark?
My job. But a little note about the logo there, Renee, which was designed by our team member, David. The seated figure is based on Xochipilli. Xochipilli was the Aztec god of flowers, and it was Schultes and Hoffmann who analyzed this and found 7 different mind-altering plants carved into his body. And what we did was put the ayahuasca vine in one hand and the ayahuasca leaves in the other. So we wanted to pay homage to this earlier work in better understanding of hallucinogens. When I say hallucinogens, I'm not just talking about flowering plants, but also fungi, of course, magic mushrooms, as well as magic frogs, which we now know the indigenous peoples of the Amazon use. And they're being studied as a means to transport drugs across the blood-brain barrier, which is one of the holy grails of Western medicine. And there are compounds which are antimicrobial, that is, they kill bacteria. And one of the great crises we face, which we don't even have time to look at these days because so many other bad things going on, is drug-resistant bacteria. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it be ironic if a hallucinogenic frog from the Western Amazon ends up helping us, beat back Staph aureus as new and drug-resistant strains continue to evolve.
Well, we're just going to have to do this again, Mark, obviously. I mean, come on. We have so much more to talk about. First of all, I feel like I know you're an ethnobotanist, but you missed your calling as a DJ. You have such an amazing voice and such a great delivery. I can't wait to hear the podcast. Plants of the Gods is the podcast, and it drops tomorrow. Oh, there you go. Marianne Rivman just said, where can we find the podcast? Is it will it be on the ACT website as
There'll be
well?
a link on the ACT website. There'll be a link on my personal website, markplotkin.com. But most importantly, it should be with iTunes and all the other different places you look for podcasts. It's not going to be hard to find.
I love it. So again, it'll be where all podcasts are available. Want to tell people we've got about another 20 minutes. I'm loving the comments, loving the questions. So if you have anything that you would like to ask Tico Torres or Mark Plotkin about the things that we've spent the last hour and 10 minutes talking about, please do come on in, leave your questions and comment now. Reminder that this is Giving Tuesday. So please, if you would like to give something that actually will make a difference, you can go to amazonteam.org and make a donation that will be used in a very sustainable and conscious way, as Mark was talking about. And lastly, the book can be bought on Amazon.com. The latest book, the latest one of 5 that Mark's done, the Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know. You talked about this new administration and being hopeful about that. Can you expound on that anymore? You said that you're hoping that you heard Joe Biden had made some statements that were supportive of what was happening in the Amazon. And what are you hoping for?
Well, I'm just hoping we can go back to the days where protecting the environment, better stewardship of our natural resources wasn't a partisan issue. I mean, what a lot of people fail to realize is environmentalism was invented by the Republican Party. The greatest environmental president in our history was Teddy Roosevelt. Okay? And the second greatest was Richard Nixon, another Republican. So I don't understand how anybody could want to be against clean air and clean water. And we need to get back to the point where this is something we can agree on. You know, it's good to have a planet with rainforests. It's good to have a planet with tigers and lions and whales and chimpanzees and gorillas. That's the world we were born into. Isn't that the world we want to leave our kids with? You know, I got an argument with somebody who said, well, you know, extinction, it always happens. And I said, really? You want to live in a world populated by pigeons and cockroaches and all the good stuff gone? I don't. So how can we build bridges to people? Like I said, with this movie that Jeff Bridges did with Susan Kucera, you had evangelical Christians working with the military, working with, you know, left wingers, which is the way it should be. And that's where a place I think we should aim for. We can agree to disagree on a lot of things, but really, don't we all need new medicines when we get sick? Look, stroke and heart attacks is the greatest killer of our species in industrialized societies where we live. Okay, we lack the drugs we need to prevent and cure these diseases. 2 examples in my new book. The vampire bat. I've been bitten by a vampire bat. I talked about it in Tales of a Shaman's Apprentice, my first book. And I was bitten by it. I bled like a stuck pig. Why did I bleed so much? Because they have anticoagulants in their saliva. If you drink blood for a living, you don't want the blood to clot. Now, these guys have a great press agent because the compound that came out of that is called Draculin. Right? It prevents clotting in a new way.
Wow.
So even more hair-raising, in my perspective, is the 18-inch long caiman leech from the Northeast Amazon, which has a different anticoagulant in its saliva. So when we talk about creepy, crawly critters, you know, that's not as appealing as elephants and whales. But these creepy, crawly critters and sometimes poisonous critters may help us in ways that whales and elephants do not. But the point I want to make here is that conservation is not a utilitarian exercise, in my perspective, the perspective of Tico, I know, Amazon conservation team for sure. Conservation is first and foremost a spiritual and ethical exercise. We should not kill species out of stupidity or greed. Cutting down rainforests to produce cheap tofu for the Chinese, to me, seems like a bad bargain. So we need to protect things because they should be protected. But the utilitarian argument needs to be made time and time again. I did an editorial in the New York Times a month or two ago entitled, "Can the Amazon Save Your Life?" And I reviewed the fact that Western medicine is the most successful system of medicine ever devised, without question. It's got a lot of holes in it. Where's the cure for pancreatic cancer? Okay. Where's the cure for insomnia? Where's the cure for acid reflux? We don't have it. I know that the shamans have treatments for all of these things, and maybe some of these would work outside that cultural context. But I want to protect those plants and those fungi and those shamans to make sure those options are open. Every system of healing does something well. Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, herbal medicine, shamanistic medicine. No system has all the answers. Not Western medicine, not shamanistic medicine. And that's the reason why everybody has an interest in protecting nature around the world, particularly in the Amazon, the richest source of biodiversity in terms of terrestrial ecosystems.
Mark, we saw the pictures of the fires, just not, during this broadcast. Once the deforestation has taken place and the fires or what have you, what's the chance that can come back? Does it take years, or is it just gone forever?
We need to look at primary forests everywhere as our seed corn. There's enough destruction, there's enough degraded areas around the world to produce all the food, to produce all the medicines we need. It goes back to what I was saying about the Kogis who said 30-70. We need to protect 70% of the planet here at home in the Amazon to give us what we need. And when the Kogis talk about this, and Tico can back me up, we're talking about not just medicine, we're talking about art and nature and spirituality. Shamans have told me, when you turn on the TV and you see an elephant being killed or rainforest being burned, it hurts your soul. It's bad for you. And that's why, once again, they can sometimes treat conditions that our own physicians can't understand because they're working in a different plane. But burning down a rainforest is a bad idea for many, many, many reasons. The typical response from the scientific community is you can't regrow a rainforest. Well, some people are saying, sure you can, but we need 700 years. Well, I'm more impatient than that. And I would rather see much better use of degraded or deforested lands than cutting down this primary forest, cutting down the seed corn to feed people we can feed other ways. And this is proven time and time again. I was in some of the soy fields in Brazil about a year ago, and there's no jobs. It's all mechanized. Okay? I mean, this is capitalism. This isn't the Brazilians. You mechanize everything. It lowers your labor costs. You create less jobs. It costs you less money. Great for the people that own the enterprises, bad for the people that need jobs. So cutting down the rainforest, claiming you're going to create jobs and then bring in all this mechanized agriculture, these people have no jobs. So they move to the city. We've all seen the barrios, the slums, the favelas that bring the major cities in tropical world. And those are people, you have to understand, went to the city seeking a better life and also fleeing the bush because there was no more bush, or they were chased up by narco traffickers, or the loggers came in and cut down everything, or the rivers were poisoned by gold miners. So I want a world with shamans and whales and less gold and less soy and less pigeons and less cockroaches. Maybe I'm just an idealist that way.
I'm going to go with the last part of that. Definitely. I'm going to go with your whole statement on that, actually, frankly. Want to remind people that we have about 13 minutes left. So if you have a question for Tico or for Mark about the work that they're doing, please do take the opportunity to ask it now. Or just, if you're reading Mark's book and you love it, please, come on in and tell us that as well. His latest book is The Amazon, What Everyone Needs to Know. And you can get that on Amazon.com. He has a podcast that drops tomorrow, Plants of the Gods, which promises to be, I heard a little bit of it. It's actually really exciting. And I love, again, because Mark, your great voice and the way you tell stories is awesome. Willie Foote has a question here. He says, Mark, you've been an inspiring mover and shaker in your field across decades. What's your secret to sustainable leadership that keeps you in the game, driving impact despite the challenges you face? So that's a great question. It's like a business question, among others.
Well, I want to start by giving a shout out to my old friend Willie Foote, who's the head of Root Capital, which is the best micro lending outfit in the business. So if you want to help peasant communities or indigenous communities around the world, root capital is your go-to place. And I first met Willie through the Skoll Foundation. The Skoll Foundation is a wonderful philanthropic enterprise set up by a visionary named Jeff Skoll, who not only is one of the great philanthropists of our time, but is also one of the great producers of our time, having produced films like Spotlight and Inconvenient Truth, and he's a friend of Tico's as well. But I don't think there is a secret sauce to sustain leadership. I mean, it's like that great story from Louisiana where I grew up, where the guy comes home from church who was famously didn't say much. And his wife said, "How was church?" And he said, "Fine." She said, "What did the preacher say?" He said, "He talked about sin." And he said, "What did he say about it?" He said, "He was against it." And so the point being that he wasn't ever going to run out of a job, right? There's always going to be bad forces to combat. So when Willie says, how do you keep going as a leader? Well, if you're obsessed with making the world a better place, which is how I started out, now I've got a lot more dents in my fenders. I want to make the world a little less bad place. You get up every day and there's no shortage of challenges. Look, we've been trying to save the rainforest for 30, 40 years, and then the fire swept through. Okay, so we thought, oh my God, it can't get worse than this. And then COVID swept through. So it's easy to get discouraged, but it's also easy to find inspiration in the challenges that arise, and knowing that if you don't do it, and you don't put together a band of obsessed, idealistic people like Tico Torres or like Jeff Bridges or like Jeff Skoll, and try and find a way ahead, it ain't going to get done. And, people say, well, social entrepreneurship, that's kind of like a weird offshoot of entrepreneurship. It's just basically for Americans and everything else to do with their time. But consider this. Social entrepreneurship is people who find answers where most people didn't even know there are questions. Social entrepreneurs are people who try and find answers in ways that aren't going to make them any money. So what came first, social entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship? The guy that invented fire, the woman that invented fire wasn't launching an IPO. Okay? The person that made the first spear, the person that made the first catapult wasn't making any money from it. So I think social entrepreneurship comes long before entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is an offshoot of social entrepreneurship. So as humans, it's human nature. Forget entrepreneurship. It's human nature to want to solve problems, to want to make a better life for your family and for yourself. So I think social entrepreneurs are the ones who are just even more idealistic and said, I don't know how we're going to pay for it, but seguimos. Let's do it.
What about people who are watching this? I know we've had a number of people who are already sort of in tune to what's happening in the rainforest, but let's say some people just kind of stumbled upon this and said, well, where do I start? This seems like such a big issue. What can I do, and what difference can I make?
Everybody can make a difference. Change is created by people, individuals who say, let's head off in that direction. Who was sitting around the fire and said, my people are hungry. I'm going to go off in the unknown lands and find something to eat. People are sitting around the fire and they're sick. A woman said, I'm going to go off in the unknown and find a plant that cures. That's how it gets done. Change does not happen with a bunch of people all of a sudden on their own decide to solve a problem. Maybe in this complex world we're living in with something like COVID-19, that's how it happened. But most problems in human history were addressed by a gal or a guy or a small number of people who said, let's fix this, let's do better. And that spirit continues. Got to continue.
Do you agree? You agree, Tico, that it can be that way, be that simple as let me try and figure out how to solve the problem. What if I'm living in an apartment in Brooklyn, New York, and I feel like, oh my gosh, what can I do?
Knowledge.
Say
okay.
Say it again.
I think it starts at home. A lot of this is knowledge. What people need is knowledge and the wanting and knowing what's on the other side and the dreams that come ahead of us. If you have children, you look for a better place for them. Mark said a wonderful thing a few years back. He goes, Tico, they're burning the books without reading them. And that's what the forest has for us. That's what the Amazon has for us. It's a lifeline to our lives, to our breathing air. And if you look at the way the ecosystem works and the moisture, the way it comes up and forms clouds that go around the world. And yes, and I know even sitting in an apartment, sometimes you got to take. I'm not going to use that plastic bottle. I'm going to buy something that is biodegradable. Those little things help. And sending $1 to this organization helps. Doesn't have to be 5. Doesn't have to be 10. Doesn't have to be 100. It could be either. But $1 helps. This is the only organization that I know of that gives close to about 98% totally to what it's supposed to do. Take care of the rainforest and the people on it, and the indigenous tribes. And I don't see that everywhere. The infrastructure of this, I have to give Mark and Lilian kudos, is small but mighty.
Yeah. And
the people that work that in South America and different parts of the world, even Europe, are amazing people to be able to, I guess, champion this fight. And I just wish that everybody viewing here would tell their friends, and whatever it takes, do whatever you can. It's very important for your future and your happiness.
Yeah, I have a 22-year-old son who is very, very in tune and concerned with the type of life that we're going to be, the type of environment that we are leaving him. He believes that, I'm not talking about, just his mother, but I'm talking about all of us, that we're not great stewards, many of us, of the land and of the water. And they're very concerned. Obviously, they're looking at the majority of their life is ahead of them. And so he's really in tune. I feel like a lot of young people are kind of in tune to this. Do you see young people coming into the organization, Mark? Do you hear from a lot of young people?
Young people are the best conservationists because they haven't had the idealism beaten out of them yet. And in the era of Black Lives Matter and the era where the current regime has relaxed all the environmental safeguards, there's no shortage of challenges. I gave a commencement address a couple of years ago at Lewis and Clark College. And I said, to prepare for this, I looked at a lot of commencement addresses, and man, most of them are terrible. They say the world's a wonderful place. Go out there and enjoy it. The world's a terrible place. We've made a mess of it. Go out there and fix it. So yes, we need more young people. Look at Greta Thunberg, who's changed the world. How old is that kid? So this idea of giving the Nobel Prize to people who can barely make it up to the front of the auditorium in their walker at the age of 95, to me is much less appealing than find an ass kicker like Greta and empowering her to do more. That's what we need more of.
Right.
Yeah, I love it. And it's so you're right. They haven't had the idealism beaten out of them yet. So they actually do have not only the ideas, but they have the energy. A lot of us are a little bit, as we get up there in age, we're kind of like, I'm ready to fight until 10 o'clock. And then, it's bedtime, but, they're still very much, they have the energy and the idealism, and it's such a great thing to see. We have 3 minutes left. So if we have any questions, you guys ask them now. Otherwise, you're going to have to hit up Mark on social media, and he's Doc Mark Plotkin on Twitter. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that on Twitter or on Instagram, Mark, or both?
It's Twitter.
That's on Twitter. Okay, so it's Doc Mark Plotkin on Twitter. Are you on Instagram, Mark?
I'm getting there.
All right, we're going to get you there because you have a lot of great information and we want to see. I love those pictures that you had a chance to.
Well, let me say one parting thought, share one parting thought with you. And I know I speak for Tico as well. The world is really in bad shape, and it's not just COVID, and it's not just Amazon fires. It's poverty, it's inequality here at home and around the world. But these problems were caused by people, and I believe these problems can be solved by people. As I said, it's highly ironic that it's the Republican Party that invented environmentalism. Let's get to a place where we can build these bridges, not us pointing our fingers at the Brazilians or the Russians or anybody pointing their fingers. Let's find commonality. Let's move together, like here with my late great friend Aritana, and build alliances where none existed, because protecting this environment is not about tree hugging, is not about loving endangered species any more than it is about protecting ourselves. And more importantly, protecting our kids and our grandkids, and giving them a world as rich and as varied as the one we were born into. That's our job.
Oh my gosh, that's a perfect parting shot or a perfect wrap. Mark, you are a born broadcaster. I can't wait to hear the podcast, which drops tomorrow. Plants of the Gods. You can hear it anywhere where you find your podcasts. Also, want to remind people the book, which we've spent time talking about in the last hour and a half here, is called The Amazon: What Everyone Needs to Know. Mark, truth be told, I was worried about my own plants when I had set up my plants, and knowing I was gonna be talking to you. I was worried. I have the less desirable shots are on the other side, but the guy who has a podcast called Plants of the Gods, my plants needed to look pretty decent. So I want to remind people also to go to amazonteam.org, where they can make a donation. And this is Giving Tuesday for the next 5 hours or so. So if you'd like to do that, maybe give a donation in someone's name, very definitely would be welcome. But really just head on over there and see what they're about. Learn more about the Amazon Conservation Team and the work that they are doing. Tico, also really want to say thank you so much to you for joining us. Loved the stories. Good luck as you guys, figure out your new normal, and hopefully you're back on the road next year, possibly.
Yeah. Well, listen,
but really,
it's important.
But also appreciate the work that you're doing with your own organization and also with ACT.
Thank you. It's an honor to be in your presence, and thank you for having me on the show. I do appreciate it.
All right.
Yes, thanks to everybody. Thanks to Tico. Thanks to Renee and Debbie and her incredible team that made this possible.
Yeah.
Oh, Mark, you're so generous. Thank you so much, everybody. Again, have a great evening, and go to amazonteam.org for more information. Bye now.
Bye, guys. Thanks for everything.